Shalom, shalom, shalom. Shalom, shalom, shalom. All right. Says the video's starting. No, not starting. I guess we're having some technical difficulties. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. Although this may be a problem, we'll see how we do with this. Let's go ahead and start with the class of today, which is Sefer Haikkarim. And we're going to look at Rabbi Joseph Albo's 6 dogmas, which everyone professing the law of Moses is obliged, required to believe. And they're connected with the 3 fundamental principles that we have laid down, but they are not derivative principles. And these are the basics. Number 1, the creation of the world in the time of nothing. It's clear that from its nature that it is a dogma common to the divine law in general, or generally, and belonging especially to the law of Moses. Though it is neither a fundamental nor derivative principle, because we can conceive a divine law in general and the law of Moses in particular without the idea of creation ex nihilo, which means from nothing something. As we've explained in earlier of our videos, but it may be likened to a branch issuing from the first principle, which the existence of God, and we explained in the above that God is free from defects. Now, if he can not create out of nothing, this would be a defect in his nature. We cannot say that the creation ex nihilo is ipso facto an impossibility. The creation must be out of something, for since the mind can conceive it and believe it and comes within the powers of the omnipotent being. And those who believe in the eternity of the world admits that God, though a simple intellect, as the cause of all things, therefore matter is caused by God through the instrumentality of a separate intelligence, which is also caused by God. But now, how can a separate intelligence be a cause of matter if there can be no coming into being ex nihilo? There can be no greater creation ex nihilo than this. Now, if you say that the reason they maintain the eternity of the world is because they cannot conceive that he should create or produce at one time and rather another time, our answer is that this is This difficulty is valid only in the case of an agent who acts by necessity, but not in an agent who acts by will. For it is the nature of the will to act at one time rather than another, as Maimonides explains in his Guide to the Perplexed, in book number 2, chapter 18. Now, since God, being the best agent, must act voluntarily and not through necessity, as we'll explain in the second book of Sefer Haikkarim, it follows that he must produce the world at a particular time, since this follows necessarily from nature of will. Now, the second dogma is the superiority of Moses' prophecy to that of all other prophets, whoever were and will be. Though this dogma is not essential to divine law, and in general nor the law of Moses in particular, nevertheless, since the Torah says explicitly that there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, the meaning is that there has not arisen and there will not arise, indicating the high value of the law that was given through him. And as will be explained in the third book, everyone who professes the law of Moses is obliged to believe it as a dogma, issuing like a branch from the principal revelation. The third dogma is that the law of Moses will not be repealed nor changed nor exchanged for another by any prophet. In other words, here Albo attacks this idea of a new Torah, a New Testament. This dogma, too, though it's not essential to divine law in the general, or the law of Moses in particular, as we have explained previously, nevertheless it is like the branch issuing from the dogma of authenticity of the messenger. And therefore it is incumbent upon everyone who professes the law of Moses to believe it, as we will explain in the third book, says Rabbi Albo. The fourth dogma is that the human perfection may be attained by fulfilling even a single one of the commandments in the laws of Moses. If this were not so, it would not follow that the laws of Moses hinders man from attaining human perfection, which the rabbis call the life of the world to come, which obviously is in contradiction again with the Christian dogma that if you can't keep any of the laws, since it will not perfect you, and therefore you are irreversibly in a state of eternal sin and punishment. If this were not so, it would follow that the law of Moses hinders man from attaining the human perfection, which the rabbis call the life of the world to come. For man attains some degrees of future life through the Noachian law. As the rabbis say, the pious men of the Gentiles have a share in the world to come. That means that those who observe the 7 Noachite commandments have a share in the world to come. This according to Rabbi Albo. Now, if everyone is professing the law of Moses and must fulfill all the many commandments mentioned therein before he can attain a degree of future life, then the law of Moses would hinder man from the acquisition of perfection rather than help him. But this cannot be the purpose of the law. As our rabbis say, God desired to bestow merit upon Israel, and therefore he gave them many laws and commandments. And therefore it seems that this dogma is a special principle of the law of Moses, as we will explain in chapter 29 of the third book. The fifth dogma is the resurrection of the dead. Some of the rabbis say that only those who are perfect will have this privilege. According to this opinion, since it's not a species of reward promised to all mankind, since all mankind cannot be perfect, but one who believes this dogma is like one who denies someone of the great miracle performed for righteous men, which are within the limits of logical possibilities. This dogma would then come under the first principle. But if the resurrection embraces all persons, as some of the authorities hold, then a person who disbelieves it is like one who denies a part of the reward and punishment which is promised to all mankind or to the whole nation. In that case, the dogma comes under the third principle, but it is of Moses in particular, for they can be conceived without it. As long as one believes in the reward and punishment generally, whether corporeal in this world or spiritual in the world to come, he does not deny the principle of the law of Moses if he believes in the resurrection. Nevertheless, it's a dogma accepted by our nation, and everyone professing the law of Moses is obliged to believe it, as we will explain in Book 4. The dogma of the coming of the Messiah is the same in the nature as the one before. It comes under the third principle, reward, and is an accepted dogma, which everyone professing the law of Moses is obliged to believe, as we'll explain in the fourth book. But it is not a principle fundamental or derived of the law of Moses, because the latter, with its principles and fundamentals and derivatives, can be conceived without it. We did not include among these dogmas and beliefs which are based upon the specific commandments like repentance, prayer, for example, the dogma that God hears the prayer of those who supplicates him, or that he receives those who turn to him in repentance, or such dogmas based upon specific commandments, because no one commandment should be counted as a dogma rather than another. Nor did we include such beliefs as the Shekinah dwelt in Israel, or that the fire came from heaven upon the altar of the burnt offerings, that the priest received answers from God through the Urim and Thummim, and so on, because they are included in the belief of biblical miracles in generally, and there is no reason for naming these rather than others, such as dividing the Red Sea, the opening of the earth, and the swallowing of Korah and his congregation, the going into Sheol alive, and still more wonderful phenomena of the earth closing up again, that after they went down, as we read, and the earth closed upon them. So it included in the belief in the Torah and in the miracles told therein. We did enumerate specifically or specially the 6 beliefs mentioned above, because they are accepted dogmas among our people and necessary for the maintenance of the fundamental and derivative principles of the Torah. The fulfillment of the Torah is dependent upon them, though it is not essential, since the law can exist without them. As we have explained, he who denies them is called a heretic, a min, though he does not deny the Torah, and he has no share in the world to come. And so summarizes Rabbi Albo in this chapter 23. Now in chapter 24, we're going to take a look at how he develops this, as he calls attention to the question concerning religious belief. If a person who professes a given religion permitted or obliged to investigate the principles of his religion in order to see whether or not it is true and it's in agreement to all the other previous principles of the divine law or not. We just don't accept it by pure believism. Rather, we look into it rationally and look for the logic in each one of these principles, and we know there are things that are beyond logic. We'll take a look at that in chapter 24 in our next video. So stay tuned, don't leave, and share this with your families and friends. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel.